An industry plant is a music artist who gains rapid popularity while posing as self-made, independent, or an organic act despite having significant backing, funding, and connections with major record labels. Some examples of industry plants are Ice Spice, Billie Eilish, Lil Nas X, Olivia Rodrigo, and Lana Del Rey. But this is an MMA channel, so what the hell does that have to do with anything? Well, you apply it to MMA, and an MMA industry plant refers to a fighter who appears to receive manufactured high level promotion, favorable matchups, and rapid ascension by the UFC, rather than earning it solely through tough merit. And surprisingly, they have some examples as Sean O'Malley, which I agree with, and Neil Magny. So here I can't stress this enough. An MMA industry plant does not mean that you are a bad fighter. It means that you get special treatment, easy matchmaking, and a lot of hype from the media and the company. So what does an MMA industry plant look like? In most cases, their first 4 to 6 fights in the UFC, they get a batch of cans, lower level fighters. Then the higher ranked guys they do get normally are older guys on a loss streak because the UFC wants them to continue the win and look good. Some successful examples of industry plants are Sean O'Malley and even Conor McGregor. For their first few fights, they got a mix of older fighters and stepping stones to get into the rankings, while other fighters had to face young prospects and bona fide UFC mainstays and future contenders before even getting into the top 15. So with that, I decided to make a list of the biggest industry plants in every single weight class right now in the UFC. Going through every single fighter on the roster, looking at my rankings, and picking out one, and in a special case, 2 fighters who are getting Dana White privilege in each weight class. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of the video. So for heavyweight, I have Mick Parkin. He is my 19th ranked heavyweight in the UFC's and the 14th ranked in the UFC's rankings. After 4 wins, which led him to a shot in the top 10 against the ultimate gatekeeper Marcin Tybura in March of 2025, he ended up losing a close fight and just wasn't able to do enough damage to get the decision. And now here is the industry plant part. All 4 of his wins all came in 2023 and 2024. They all have been cut from the UFC. He won a decision against Jamal Pogues, Kyle Machado, and Muhammad Usman, and then the UFC had to get him a finish before he got a rankings jump, so they gave him the chinny and terrible Lucas Brzeski. No wins against anyone currently right now on the UFC roster in the top 15 rankings, and he was being hyped up and advertised as a good training partner of Tom Aspinall, and he just has no threat really at all on the feet and is just a solid overall grappler and wrestler. Now he gets a shot into the top 10, and he ended up losing to the much older and much experienced Marcin Tybura, making him 4-1 in the UFC now. He was scheduled to face his teammate Mario Pinto before Parkin had to pull out of the fight due to an injury. And I think he probably would have lost that fight as well, and I'll be honest, I do not like Mick Parkin, and I don't think he is a good fighter really. I feel like someone like Thomas Peterson, who is 4-3 against much better competition in the UFC, is better than a 4-1 Mick Parkin, and he hasn't got nearly as much hype. Parkin needs to be careful on who he chooses to get into the cage with after a long layoff, because I feel like he would lose to people like Vitor Petrino, Brando Parakic, Steven Asplin, and like I said, Thomas Peterson. I think that he is going to be a failed industry plant for the future, and I'm going to look to fade him in some of his next matchups unless they are low level fighters. For light heavyweight, I have Navajo Sterling. He is my 20th ranked light heavyweight in the UFC. And the young pupil of Israel Adesanya in city kickboxing, Navajo I feel like has much more potential than someone like Mick Parkin. He got a shot on the Dana White Contender Series, and just look at his Dana White Contender Series opponent and tell me who you think is going to win. Mismatch and a half, he won by second round knockout, getting signed to the UFC. He is 4-0 in the UFC with 3 decision wins against Tuco Tukos, who he beat easily, Ivan Ursulan, who he outstruck and knocked down late in the fight, and Rodolfo Bellato, who is a decent fighter as well. They're all in the UFC, and that's still a plus. And then his 4th win was his first finish, a second round TKO of Bruno Lopez, who has only lost by knockout throughout his entire career. He is young in MMA, is a good striker, but his matchups have been more of safe picking matchmaking. picking fighters that play to his style, which is on the feet, and he has not faced any great grapplers. And I think he is going to get another guy just outside of the rankings, and eventually in his career, I believe he will scrape the back half of the top 10 within the next 2 to 3 years. But he hasn't faced any dangerous fighter yet. Watch the UFC give him like an older vet guy like Ion Kutelaba, and if he wins, they're going to give him someone like Nikita Krylov because Nikita Krylov is older and chinny. He has potential. I don't see him going undefeated for much longer. He is due for some tough guys. He is a good fighter. He is at least good enough to respectfully receive some of the hype that he is getting. I think he has some decent potential, but I don't know. We'll see how he does against the upper echelon guys. I do think he's getting some favorable matchmaking right now. This division actually has so many industry plants, I had to name two, and they're probably two of the top three most hyped up prospects in middleweight arguably, and Ateba Gautier. He is my 26th ranked middleweight in the UFC, and he is 4-0 in the UFC. Getting 3 first round knockouts against the shit Jose Medina, pretty bad Robert Valentin, and the 3-day notice Tristan Vines. He looked good in his fourth fight, dominating the first 2 rounds in a decision win over the insanely durable Andrei Pulayev, who is a decent fighter. Finally getting a win against an opponent that is at least worth something on his resume. Now he is scheduled against Ozzy Diaz, who is not a good fighter at all, and why are we sacrificing him? He has proved that he's dangerous enough in the boxing and at least a good enough prospect enough right now. Give him someone in the top 40. At least like a Michel Pereira, a Cesar Almeida, or how about an Edmund Shabazian, who is number 23, but no, he needs to fight a top 7 fighter in middleweight in the company for some reason. The UFC wants him to win because in the UFC right now, there's not a whole lot of African-born prospects right now on the rise. There are, but compared to places like Australia, Mexico, and Southeast Asia, there just isn't a lot. I think that there is a high likelihood Gautier will be in the top 15 soon, and I see him being in the top 10 easily at some point in his career. We will see how the matches go against the top of the division, but he is legit. Give him somebody good right now. Now for my second middleweight, Basingor Susurkayev. He is my 39th ranked middleweight in the UFC, and he trains with the middleweight champion Khamzat Chimaev, who is also born in the country of Chechnya as well. He fought a guy on the Dana White Contender Series August 12th of 2025 on a Tuesday, and he won by front kick to the body in round 1, being the only person on that episode of the Dana White Contender Series to get a contract. Then, on August 16th, 4 days later, he had his short notice debut on a pay-per-view headlined by his training partner Khamzat Chimaev, and he beat Eric Nolan in the first round. It was a close fight where both of them had success, but in the second round, Susurkayev hurt Nolan's leg with a kick and submitted him in round 2, winning 2 fights in just 5 days. Then in his third fight against Eric McConaughey, he looked like he had some issues with pressure, but eventually he got into his flow and got a third round KO and landed a slick counter shot and knocked him down. Now with the first round KO on the Dana White Contender Series and being 2-0 in the UFC with a submission and a KO, but against competition level that is not so great. His Dana White Contender Series opponent has lost on the Dana White Contender Series before, and Nolan and McConaughey haven't done anything in the UFC yet. Now he is facing the Jordan Santos, who is 1-1 in the UFC on the same card as Ateba Gautier, by the way. And that isn't an improvement in my mind. That isn't a level of competition that is improving. He is good, but I believe he has less potential than Ateba Gautier, Basingor Susurkayev, I mean. I see him being much more of a struggle getting into the top 15 for him, and expect him to get some cherry-picked matchups and some cans and old guys for the next 2 years, because I think they're going to pull a rather long development program for him where he doesn't really face any guy that's a threat to him. I think he has less potential. I do think he could be in the rankings someday, but he is going to have a much more of a struggle than Ateba Gautier. My industry plant for welterweight is proper Mike Malott. He is my 18th ranked welterweight in the UFC, and he has been labeled as Canada's next great welterweight prospect. A good wrestler with a smart striking style that isn't super dangerous, but his technique is really good. Malot's first two fight with the company was in 2023, and he beat Johan Linnes and Adam Fugit both by submission where he showed decent striking. But those two fighters aren't in the UFC anymore, and their combined record was 3-7 in the UFC. His third fight in the company, they gave him the ultimate gatekeeper test against Neil Magny, who was ranked at the time after beating 2 cans. And oh yeah, it's in Canada as well. And it was going perfectly. Malott was whooping his ass everywhere, on the feet, on the ground, and then in the last minute of the fight, in the last minute of round 3, he got reversed and pounded out on the ground in a crazy comeback win for Neil Magny. He had the perfect fast rise into the rankings with a lot of media hype, and he fumbled it at the goal line. He ended up getting 3 wins in a row after that, getting a bounce-back win against the ultimate victim in Trevin Giles by decision, Charles Radke, who he KO'd in round 2, which is an extremely impressive performance because Radke isn't too bad. And then he beat the insanely inconsistent Kevin Holland, who has 14 career losses in his career, to get back into the rankings again. And now he is fighting the 39-year-old Gilbert Burns on a 4-fight losing streak, potentially to get into the top 10 of the UFC's rankings at welterweight. And this is absolutely nuts. Since his debut, which was in Vegas, his next 7 fights in the UFC have all been in Canada. Not joking. Last 7 fights have been in home territory. What kind of privilege is that? I think Mike Malott is good. He is 6-1 in the UFC, and I think he will beat the aging Gilbert Burns in his next fight in his first ever main event. But I think he'll be in the lower part of the top 15 rankings for a lot of his career, because I think he will be beat by anyone who is actually top 15 level at 170 pounds. He has to beat people like Bonfim, Usman, Medic, and Edwards, and I don't like his odds against any of those people above him. And behind him, he has people like Miktabek Orablai and MVP and a bunch of young, dangerous fighters right now on the come-up, who I don't think he would do quite as good as some of the other guys in the rankings. He is a good UFC fighter, but he is not top 10 at 170 pounds, and I'm going to look to fade him in the future for sure. And at lightweight, I think this is the best example of an industry plant I can give you over the last few years. Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. He is my 6th ranked lightweight in the UFC. And yes, Paddy just fought for a title. Yes, he is in the top 10. Yes, I believe he actually is really top 10 level in the UFC. I believe his jiu-jitsu is really good. I believe that he can get a lot of fighters down in the clinch in his trips, and he can normally get fighters down. He just kind of didn't do it in his last fight. His striking is goofy and effective, and his kicks and knees are nice, and his boxing is just kind of iffy, but it does work. I think he is a good fighter. It's just he is the perfect example of an industry plant. He had a decorated regional scene career before joining the UFC, beating the likes of Julian Erosa. And then when he got into the UFC, they gave him 3 names that really offer him no threat at all on the feet and got favorable matchups. Against Luigi Vendramini, who he knocked out in round 1, then Ricardo Vargas, who he subbed in round 1 in his home country of England. Both of those fighters have gone 1-3 in the UFC and are now no longer in the company. And Jordan Levitt, who is okay, he subbed him in round 2, also in England. Then after going 3-0 in the UFC, he gets a co-main event slot and a pay-per-view. After 3 wins over low-level competition, he gets Jared Gordon. And early in the fight, Paddy broke his foot and he wasn't able to do much and almost got a unanimously known robbery win over Jared Gordon. Now at 4-0 in his last fight, and his last fight being a tough look for him, the UFC gives him a 39-year-old Tony Ferguson on a 6-fight losing streak with 4 of those losses by finish. Why? Just why? That's a terrible fight when they announced it, and it's a terrible fight looking at it now. Because of the matchmaking. It's just sad. Then after he beats Tony by a decision where he almost finishes him a time or 2, he gets a jump up and gets a 37-year-old Bobby Green in a return home after some time in the States. And I won't hold this one against him. At least it wasn't home favoritism as bad as Mike Malott. but he beat Green in round 1 by submission, finally getting himself into the rankings after a murderer's row of late 30-year-old men and fighters no longer in the UFC. Now at 6-0 in the UFC, he got a shot into the top 10, and he fights Michael Chandler, who is very dangerous but is 38 years old and 2-4 in the UFC at the time when he fought him. They gave him the best person for him, and he ended up whooping Chandler's ass over 3 rounds and TKOing him. His last 3 opponents were 37, 38, and 39 years old when he fought him, and now he gets an interim title shot on the first ever Paramount Plus card earlier this year against Justin the Highlight Gaethje, who is by far the best fighter he has ever faced. And in a very entertaining fight, Gaethje outstruck Paddy Pimblett and won his second interim title fight, handing Paddy his first loss in the UFC. Obviously, Paddy is good, but they really didn't want him to lose, and they gave him a lot of favorable matchups all the way through to the top. Now the challenge starts. He needs 2 to 3 fights minimum to get another shot at the title, and he will probably get someone like Dan Hooker or another big-name veteran guy, but he has never faced a prospect. Give him a BSD, give him a Faraz Ziam, Manuel Torres, maybe a Quinlan Salkild if he beats Beneil Dariush. Give him someone young and on the rise that is not an old guy on a losing streak. He hasn't had that style of fight yet. He has been the figurehead for industry plants over the last 10 years probably. And we will see how he holds up now against the top 10 level, because the challenge of his career, I truly believe, starts right now. Now for featherweight, we have an incoming industry plant. Tommy McMillan, my 56th ranked featherweight in the UFC. Tommy McMillan is a big featherweight who has a good grappling game overall with good takedowns, wrestling scrambles, and a good choke submission game as well. His striking looks goofy as hell, but it is powerful, and he is only 28 years old, so he has some time to develop. He trains with Sugar Sean O'Malley, and let's be honest, he kind of looks like Sean O'Malley a little bit. He is good on the mic, and he loves to gamble a lot, so Dana White's going to love him even more. And in his Dana White Contender Series fight, it was amazing. He got a great comeback decision win against a guy who was a tough opponent and who I believe someday will eventually be in the UFC. Then in his UFC debut, he ended up getting a first-round TKO where he threw 138 strikes in just under 4 minutes against a guy who is 0-2 now in the UFC with 2 first-round KO losses and Manolo Cecchini, who arguably isn't UFC level. Now with McMillan being 1-0 in the UFC with 1 Dana White Contender Series win, I feel like he is going to get special treatment. He will get a bare minimum of 3 fighters that are like bottom 25 level in the division in his next few fights. Right now, I think his grappling is great, and it can hold up against some decent level fighters right now. His striking needs some improvement, but he has power and he does tuck his chin pretty well. I will say also, he has some good cardio and it has a durable as hell chin. He is a tough fighter. He will probably make the top 15 at some point in his career, but it is too early to tell at the moment. I'm going to try to predict his next few fights, and he will probably get somebody like a Con Offley, Michael Aswell, who I think would be the tougher fighter here, and the almighty Jekka Sergi. He clearly has an advantage in those matchups, whether it's striking, grappling, or durability. I feel like they'll give him matchups where he has a clear advantage in a certain aspect, and I believe that he will get some special treatment throughout the rest of his UFC career, especially the next 2 years. So, expect some easy matchmaking for Tommy Gunn McMillan. Bia Mesquita. Bia Mesquita is my number 14th ranked women's bantamweight in the UFC. In this weight class, it's hard to find a fighter considered an industry plant. She is a legit grappler, and she is a multiple-time world BJJ champion. That's why her nickname is the Lady Goat. Her submissions are dangerous, her ground and pound is dangerous, and her takedowns are quick. And she has a clinch game as well where you're not really winning in it either. She is pretty dominant there. Her boxing is decent, and she seems like she has some power in it, so she is a good fighter. Her debut was against Arina Alexeva, who is 1-2 in the UFC, and she mauled her ass. Out-grappled her, smothered her, and choked her out 2 minutes into round 2. Looked good, but against bad competition, and in her second fight, she got an upgrade in level competition. She got the 2-1 in the UFC Montserrat Rendon, who has 7 wins all in her MMA career, all of them being by decision. And Bia Mesquita wobbled her on the feet pretty bad and then mauled her again on the ground and rear naked choked her out in the first round. So now at 2-0 in the UFC, she is scheduled to face Melissa Mullins, who probably is her best opponent that she has faced, but it is not a great fighter either. She is 35 years old, and they shouldn't wait too long before they give her a higher up shot in women's bantamweight because it is depleted of talent right now. She is a really good fighter, and she will be in the top 10, I believe, as soon as next year at some point. Give her Zalesniakova, a Cornell, give her maybe a Macy Chasson towards the top because I do believe she is a legit fighter, and she is going to be a fighter to look at for the future. My men's bantamweight industry plant is Raul Rosas Jr. He is my 15th ranked bantamweight in the UFC, and Raul Rosas is a dominant grappler, big guy for the weight class, and he has a developing kickboxing striking style. He has had a unique UFC career, making his Dana White Contender Series debut just a few weeks shy of his 18th birthday. He beat a decent regional scene fighter in Mando Gutierrez by decision. Then Mando went on to lose on maybe the worst season of the Ultimate Fighter ever in his next fight after that. In his debut, he got a guy in Jay Perrin, who he ended up beating by first round submission in his UFC debut on a pay-per-view. Perrin was 0-3 in his UFC career, and he isn't UFC level, but he isn't doing bad on the regional scene. In his second fight, he got Christian Rodriguez, who for a few years he was known as kind of an ultimate prospect buster. Rosas couldn't get him down, and he lost the decision, getting outstruck on the feet, giving him his first loss in his career and his first loss in the UFC. After that, he got a bounce-back first-round KO win over Terrence Marshall, who was 0-2 in the UFC in his career before he got cut. And then he ended up facing Ricky Tercios, who he submitted in round 2 in their fight, and Tercios is now 2-4 in the UFC in his career. So they are slowly building him up against lower-level fighters after his first career loss. After going on a 2-fight win streak, he got a chance to fight on the UFC's once-in-a-lifetime card at the Las Vegas Sphere, while also being the opening fight on the card. He beat Arichi Lang by decision, which was his best opponent by far, being that Arichi Lang is now 4-4 in the UFC. Then they gave him a step down in competition against Vince Morales, who is now 3-8 in his UFC career. He did beat him by decision, giving Raul Rosas on a 4-fight win streak against guys who aren't even in the top 40 of bantamweight. Now with 4 low-level wins in a row, he gets a shot into the rankings against the perennial gatekeeper into the top 10 in Rob Font, who was 3-3 in his last 6 fights and is a pure boxer, so stylistically he is the best matchup he could have got for him. And he ended up winning a boring, smothering, grappling decision, getting him the number 13 spot into the UFC's top 15 bantamweight rankings. Being 21 and a half years old, having a Spanish market behind him, and his funny personality keeps the UFC wanting him to win and get more fans. He is on a 5-fight win streak against low-level UFC fighters and an old boxer. He hasn't fought any of his fellow prospects, dangerous explosive fighters, or prime UFC level guys who have proved that they are still primed in the UFC. Give him a Ronnie Barcelos, a Farid Basharat, or even a prospect versus prospect fight between 2-star Mexican fighters and Raul Rosas and David Martinez. He can't get a bunch of old guys. You have to give him proven guys on win streaks. And I'll be honest, he will be top 10 level for a while, but I don't see him getting into the top 5 in the future. I believe right now, if they push him, he will lose to any of the top 7 to 5 guys in the rankings. She got the call into the UFC at 5-0, and she got a vicious first-round counter-cross KO a minute into the fight, an amazing highlight over Victoria Leonardo, who was cut after the fight because she went 1-4 in the company. Then in her next fight, she got a main card fight in her home country of China. She was winning the fight and ended up getting caught with a head kick and submitted in the 3rd round against Gabriela Fernandez, who is an okay MMA fighter, being 3-3 in the UFC right now. It is hard to find a women's flyweight industry plant, but I am going to go with Kong Wang. The 8th ranked women's flyweight fighter in the UFC, she is a seasoned and credentialed kickboxer and Muay Thai fighter with a win over Valentina Shevchenko in kickboxing. She has fast and powerful hands and kicks as well, and a lot of experience before she got into the UFC. She has a lot of hype from fans, and she has some of that female Alex Pereira arc because she is a dangerous kickboxer with a win over the current champion. She got the call into the UFC at 5-0, and she got a vicious first round counter cross KO a minute into the fight. An amazing highlight over Victoria Leonardo, who was cut after the fight because she went 1-4 in the company. Then in her next fight, she got a main card fight in her home country of China. She was winning the fight and ended up getting caught with a head kick and submitted in the third round against Gabriela Fernandez, who is an okay MMA fighter, being 3-3 in the UFC right now. After the loss, her hype did take a little bit of a dip, but she had to get it built back up. So she fought the Fighting Nerds fighter in Bruna, Brazil, where Wang whooped her ass on the feet for a dominant decision win. Then she faced the grappler in Ariane de Silva, which I actually saw in person, and Wang kicked her in the leg about 50 times and pieced her up in the boxing for a pure shutout decision win. Now 3-1 in the UFC on a 2-fight win streak by decision against fighters with a combined record of 9 wins and 13 losses in the UFC, both no longer being in the UFC, by the way. Now she got a shot into the top 15 of the division. Now, it was against a good opponent and a good grappler in Eduardo Mora, so stylistically, this is a tough fight for her and probably the toughest fight for her in her entire career. And she passed with flying colors, defending the takedowns and piecing her up badly as the fight went on, winning a decision. Mora is now 3-2 in the UFC against solid competition, so this was by far her best win in her career. Now 4-1 in the UFC with an increasing level of competition, Wang might be on the fast track to the top of the division because of her fight style and the storyline with Valentina Shevchenko. If she wins enough and just gets into the top 5 while Shevchenko defends the belt for another time or two, it could be a massive fight with a great selling point and a great storyline. Wang is a legit striker, and she is a dangerous fighter for any women's flyweight. She could get Rose Namajunas, Macy Barber, or even Jasmine Jasdavicius in her next fight. And maybe she can sneak into the top 5 at some point in the weight class, but I don't think she is a complete enough MMA fighter to win a championship in the UFC. She is very entertaining, and she is a great fighter to watch, and she is one of the best strikers in the division. She is a successful industry plant, but I don't see her becoming a champion someday. Expect her to be in the lower part of the top 5, though, throughout her career. Now, for men's flyweight, I have Andre Lima. He is my 20th ranked flyweight in the UFC, and Andre Lima is a technical striker with a developing ground game as well. He trains with the likes of Kevin Vallejos when he was on the come-up, and Lima got a shot on the Dana White Contender Series at 6-0, and he faced a 14-1 Brazilian vet who was a good regional scene fighter. And he won by an entertaining striking fight where he won by unanimous decision, giving him some hype coming into his UFC debut. Then in his debut, he faced another undefeated Brazilian prospect in Igor Severino, making his UFC debut as well. And it was looking to be an entertaining and close fight until Severino decided to bite the arm of Lima in a clinch situation, giving Lima the second round disqualification win because he got bit. He got a special bonus, and Dana White labeled it the Bite of the Night bonus, and then Lima also got the bite marks tattooed on his arm, which might have been a smudge too far. With a debut win in a crazy fashion, he got his name out there and ended up getting some hype. He got another debuting fighter on short notice in Mitch Raposo, who is now 1-2 in the UFC, and Lima ended up beating him clearly. But one of the judges was scrolling through his phone during the fight because it was ruled a split decision win for Lima. It was pretty unanimous. Then he got a fight against Felipe Dos Santos, who is a good fighter and he should be in the UFC, but ultimately he ended up going 1-3 in his UFC career against good competition, which Lima ended up beating him by a clear decision as well. Then instead of getting a shot into the rankings, being 3-0 in the UFC, he got a shot against the 1-1 in the UFC, Daniel Perez, who he easily handled and even showed some grappling, getting his first submission win late in the third round. His level of competition, you could argue, is going down since his first fight in the UFC, facing UFC opponents with a record of 3-7, and he is now scheduled against another UFC fighter who isn't in the top 30 of the rankings in my mind, and Kevin Borjas, who is 1-4 in the UFC against good competition, but why does Borjas keep getting these tough matchups and Lima keeps getting these easy setups? Borjas is a good fighter, and he probably is the best fighter that he fought, but why isn't he getting a definitive jump up in competition? Lima has legit wins on his resume. Good striking and decent overall grappling. He is 4-0 in the UFC. That shouldn't get him a fight against a guy who is 1-4 in the company. He should be fighting someone just in the rankings or just out of it. Give him Alan Nascimento, Joseph Morales, or Tagir Olimbekov. He is solid. He should be ranked in the top 10 at some point in his career, but he isn't getting the experience level against the top level guys right now to show me that he is top 10 level right now. Give him a step up in competition. I believe he is a good fighter, and I think his next fight after Borjas should be a guy top 15 level, no questions asked. Puja Tomar is my strawweight industry plant, and Puja Tomar is my 37th ranked women's strawweight, and this is by far the lowest level fighter I have named in this video, so why not put it at the very top? Tomar has a solid karate-esque striking style with a god-awful ground game. Tomar faced good competition outside of the UFC and almost lost to all of them, getting wins and beating the cans on the India regional scene. And that is where we get an industry plant, ladies and gentlemen. Tomar is from a huge market with no good MMA fighters at all in India. She got a shot into the UFC with a record of 8-4 in MMA, and she got Rayani Dos Santos, who ended up going 0-3 in the UFC before she ended up getting cut. And Tomar won a decision, and it was a very disputed and close fight where a lot of people thought that Tomar actually lost. And she got a robbery decision win because of the Indian market. Then she gets a fight against Shauna Bannon, who is 2-2 in the UFC against low-level fighters, and Tomar head kicked her and almost finished her in the second round, but then she simply stupidly gave up an armbar and lost by submission in the second round. Now she is getting a main event slot of a fight night for Road to UFC fighters against another fighter that I considered putting here in Shi Ming. 3 fights in the UFC, 3 fighters who are bottom 10 of the division, maybe even bottom 5, and she won't get anyone good anytime soon because she won't win much more in the UFC. I don't see her being in the UFC for much longer, but because she has the Indian market behind her, she will receive some hype and plenty of fans because there is no Indian fighters to root for because mostly they all kind of suck. Thank you all for making it to the end of the video. I truly appreciate it. My work schedule was getting switched around a lot, so I was having struggles trying to get this video out. Worked quite a bit of time on it. Make sure to like, comment, and share it with one of your buddies, and I hope you all have an amazing day.